The sun had barely risen over Mumbai when a man in plain clothes stepped out of a modest taxi, the kind with cracked leather seats and a faint scent of old incense lingering in the air. He paid the driver with a gentle smile and a soft, "Thank you," even though the man had taken the long route and charged extra. Sundar didn't complain. He never did. The hospital before him was tall and cold-looking, all glass and steel, shining like pride itself under the morning light. People rushed in and out, some in pain, some with hope in their eyes. No one looked twice at the man standing quietly near the gate, holding a folder worn at the edges and a phone with no notifications. Inside, the air was sharp and sterile. The reception area was full of activity. Crying children, tired mothers, worried fathers, and nurses moving swiftly like clockwork. Sundar walked in quietly, his shoulders slightly hunched, not because he lacked confidence, but because life had taught him to be small in spaces that didn't welcome humility. He wore an old blue shirt, the kind that had faded from years of washing and sandals that told a longer story than his silence ever could. He approached the front desk slowly, waiting patiently as the receptionist argued over a missed appointment. When she finally turned to him, she didn't smile. She barely looked up. "Name?" she said flatly. "Sundar," he answered softly. "Full name," she replied, not hiding her irritation. "Sundar Pichai." She paused for a second, then shrugged. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," he said, gently placing the folder on the desk. "I was hoping to speak with a doctor. It's about something important." "Everyone's here for something important," she muttered, flipping through a thick register. "You'll have to wait." He nodded and stepped aside. There were no chairs left, so he stood by the wall watching the room with quiet eyes. He wasn't there for treatment. He didn't have any reports in that folder. There were no test results, no prescriptions, just a letter. It was handwritten. The ink was slightly smudged at the bottom. It had taken him 3 nights to write. As the minutes passed, Sundar noticed a commotion by the emergency ward. A young boy was being rushed in on a stretcher. He looked about 10 years old. His mother was crying uncontrollably. The father was shouting for someone to help. Sundar stepped forward instinctively, trying to offer a hand, but was quickly pushed back by a nurse. "Don't get in the way," she snapped. He apologized quietly and moved back, but his eyes never left the boy. Then, as if fate itself was watching, a tall man in a white coat stormed out of the elevator. His walk was fast, purposeful. His name tag read, Dr. Vijay Nambiar, head of surgery. He was well known in the hospital, feared by many for his temper, respected for his skill. Sundar watched him approach, his expression unreadable. This was the man he had come to see. As Dr. Nambiar passed him, Sundar stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely. The doctor stopped. He looked Sundar up and down, his face twisting with annoyance. "What is it?" "I was hoping to speak with you. Just for a few minutes. It's about the hospital." Dr. Nambiar scoffed. "Are you a supplier? We don't take walk-ins for business." "No, sir, I'm not here for business. It's more personal." "Are you a patient?" "No, sir, Then this isn't the place for you," the doctor interrupted sharply. "This is a hospital, not a counseling center. People are dying here. Go stand in line like everyone else." He turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. People nearby glanced at Sundar with a mix of curiosity and pity. A guard even began walking toward him, thinking he might be a disturbance. Sundar simply bowed his head slightly and stepped back to the wall, clutching the folder a little tighter. He didn't feel shame, but something in his chest ached, not because he had been spoken to harshly, but because the man had spoken without looking. He had seen a shirt and sandals, not a person. A few moments later, Sundar was still standing there when a nurse passed by and dropped a tray of syringes and papers. Instinctively, he bent down to help her. As he picked up a few items, their hands brushed, and she looked at him properly for the first time. "Thank you," she said softly, surprised. "It's all right," he replied. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked. hoping to speak with someone important. You'll need a lot of patience for that, she smiled sadly, then walked away. Sundar sat down on the floor now that the corner had cleared. He pulled the folder onto his lap and opened the letter, reading it once more even though he knew every word. It began with, "Dear Sir, I am writing to express my deep gratitude for what this hospital once meant to me." He never got to finish reading it again, because a loud voice suddenly echoed through the corridor. "You again?" It was Dr. Nambiar, now walking back toward him. "Are you still here? I told you to leave." Sundar stood up slowly, holding the folder close. "Sir, I promise I won't take more than 2 minutes. Just, please read this." The doctor snatched the paper from his hand. "What is this, a complaint?" he mocked. He read the first few lines, then laughed. "Oh, so you're one of those charity cases, huh? Came here for free treatment and now want to preach about gratitude?" His voice was loud. People turned to watch. Sundar didn't speak. He just stood still, eyes calm but heavy. "You people don't get it," Dr. Nambiar continued. "This isn't a place for dreamers. It's a business. And if you think writing a heartfelt letter will change anything, you're wasting your time." He tossed the letter onto the floor and walked away, not even looking back. The silence that followed was long and cold. Sundar knelt down slowly and picked up the paper. It had a footprint on it now. Still, he folded it carefully, as if it were made of glass, and placed it back in the folder. As he stood again, something changed in his face. The quiet warmth was still there, but behind it, something stronger began to rise. Not anger, but a kind of decision, the kind that grows slowly over years of silence, humility, and waiting. He turned around and began walking toward the elevator, and this time someone noticed him. A young doctor standing nearby, a resident named Arav, had seen the whole thing. He frowned and whispered to a nurse beside him, "Do you know who that man is?" She shook her head. "Me neither," Arav said, his eyes following Sundar. "But I think we just made a big mistake." The elevator doors closed behind Sundar with a soft chime, but inside him, something louder had clicked. It wasn't anger. No, anger was noisy and impulsive. This was quieter, steadier. It was the sound of a man who had given people more chances than they deserved and had finally decided to take back the silence he'd once given freely. The metal box hummed softly as it rose, floor by floor, toward the top of the building. The executive level, a place most patients never even knew existed. The inside of the elevator reflected his face back at him. Not many people recognized him now. He didn't wear suits or expensive watches. He didn't carry himself like someone powerful. He didn't need to. He had spent his whole life working in rooms where the loudest person was rarely the wisest. He had built things with his mind, led with compassion, and stayed invisible on purpose. Not for fame, not even for gratitude, just for peace. But sometimes peace has to be paused when injustice grows too bold. As the elevator climbed, memories began to return. Memories of this very building, years ago, when the paint on the walls was chipped, the lights flickered in the hallways, and the hospital barely had enough staff to cover the night shifts. Back then, it had been a place of struggle. His mother had been treated here once. He had sat in these very halls for nights, watching her suffer in silence, unable to afford proper care, listening to doctors talk about her like she was a burden. It was here that the seed of change had first planted itself in his heart. And so years later, when he finally had the resources and the power, he didn't build a mansion. He didn't buy a sports car. He bought this hospital, quietly, anonymously, through a foundation. He'd hired better staff, brought in new machines, improved the training. He had invested not in bricks but in people. But he had made one mistake. He had trusted that leadership would follow his values. And now, today, a doctor who worked under his name had humiliated him in front of dozens. The elevator stopped on the top floor. The doors opened into a completely different world. Soft lighting, quiet hallways, carpeted floors. This was where the administrative offices sat. Most doctors never came up here. Sundar walked past a secretary who looked up, confused. No one was allowed here without an appointment. "Sir, excuse me," she began, standing up. He turned to her gently. "Could you please inform Mr. Singh that Sundar is here to see him?" Her expression shifted. "Mr. Singh? The CEO?" "Yes." She stared for a moment, unsure whether this was a prank. But something about his voice, about the calm in his eyes, made her reach for the phone. After a short call, she stood up quickly and opened the glass door. "Please, right this way, sir." Inside the office, a middle-aged man stood up from behind a desk. His face lit up in surprise and slight panic. "Sir, you should have informed us you were coming. We would have prepared—" "No need," Sundar said, sitting down slowly. "I came as a guest, not an owner." Mr. Singh nodded nervously. "Is everything all right?" Sundar placed the folder on the table. "I was in the waiting hall downstairs for over an hour. I spoke to Dr. Nambiar." Mr. Singh froze. He swallowed hard. "I wasn't aware." "He didn't recognize me," Sundar said with a faint smile. "He told me this hospital is a business, that people like me don't belong here." Mr. Singh's face turned pale. "Sir, I'll take immediate action. This is unacceptable. No," Sundar interrupted gently but firmly. "I don't want punishment. Not yet. I want understanding. And I want to see for myself how deep this problem goes. Because if one of our senior doctors speaks this way, then something in our system has gone wrong." Mr. Singh nodded slowly, his voice low now. "I understand." "Good," Sundar said, standing. "I'll be spending some time here. I'll walk the halls, speak to staff. Not as a chairman, not as a name on a wall, just as a man, a patient maybe, a visitor. And I want no one to know who I am. Not yet." "Of course," Mr. Singh said. As Sundar left the office, walking slowly back, toward the elevator, the weight of the past and the urgency of the present walked beside him, and far below on the ground floor, Dr. Vijay Nambiar was still pacing, barking orders, completely unaware that the man he had mocked was about to rewrite the very foundation beneath his feet. Meanwhile, down in the cafeteria, young Dr. Arav was still talking about the incident. "I know that wasn't just some poor man," he said to Nurse Ananya. "Did you see how calm he was? The way he folded that paper like it still mattered even after it was stepped on. Some people are just like that," Ananya said, stirring sugar into her tea. "No," Arav replied. "That wasn't submission. That was something else. Something stronger. Like dignity. The kind you only see in people who've survived worse." He paused. "I think we messed up." At that moment, the elevator doors opened again and Sundar stepped out. Not onto the executive floor, but back into the general ward. His eyes scanned the hallway, not with judgment, but with quiet attention. He saw a cleaner struggling to mop while avoiding foot traffic. He saw a father pacing outside the ICU with red eyes and a trembling phone in his hand. He saw a nurse rubbing her temples in exhaustion during a rare 5-minute break. This was the real heart of the hospital, not the boardroom. He walked to the front desk again. This time, a different receptionist sat there. She was younger, kinder in the face. She smiled at him. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked. "I was hoping to volunteer," he said. "Help with small things, talk to patients, maybe bring food to someone." She blinked, surprised. "You want to volunteer?" "Yes, I have time. And maybe someone needs company more than they need a cure." She smiled again, warmer this time. "That's rare. Sure, I'll put you down for today." He picked up a patient chart from the volunteer cart and walked slowly down the corridor. Outside one of the rooms, he paused. The door was slightly open. Inside was an old man, sitting by a window, eyes empty. Sundar knocked gently and stepped inside. "May I sit?" he asked. The old man didn't reply, but Sundar sat anyway. "You remind me of my father," Sundar said quietly. "He used to sit just like that, staring out like the world was behind him, not in front." The man slowly turned. "Your father, was he kind?" "Very," Sundar said. "But the world wasn't always kind to him." The old man's lip trembled. "Mine too." They sat in silence, two strangers with heavy hearts, connected not by identity or wealth, but by something simpler: human pain, human presence. And as Sundar sat there in a quiet hospital room where no one knew his name, a plan began to form. Not for revenge, but for revelation. He would hold up a mirror to this place. And everyone from the proudest doctor to the humblest staff would have to face what they saw. The days that followed moved slowly, like water dripping through cracks in stone. Inside the hospital walls, routines continued. People came and went. Doctors rushed through corridors, stretchers wheeled by like quiet storms, and the rhythm of suffering and healing danced together under the cold, white lights. But somewhere in between those moments that most barely noticed, a quiet presence was beginning to shift everything. Sundar Pichai, the man who had once been spoken over and stepped around, now walked the halls not as a chairman, not as a businessman, but as someone invisible. And listening, he had been volunteering quietly for 3 days, cleaning trays, reading to old patients, listening to stories from the lonely. Some of the nurses began to recognize him, not his identity, but his heart. The kind that didn't judge, didn't rush, didn't pretend. They called him uncle or sir with gentle warmth, not knowing he was the owner of the very building they worked in. They saw him as someone simple, and that was exactly how Sundar wanted it. Simplicity gave him access. Humility gave him vision. But beneath that calm, he was taking notes. He watched how the nurses were overworked, how the junior doctors avoided eye contact when senior staff shouted at them. He noticed which rooms had broken fans, which medicines always ran out first. He noticed that patients with wealth were taken in faster, offered better beds, smiled at more often. And most of all, he noticed the fear in people's eyes when Dr. Vijay Nambiar walked through the hallway. Dr. Nambiar hadn't seen Sundar again. He didn't recognize him in the simple shirt and slippers. He wouldn't have looked twice at him. In fact, on the second evening, he passed Sundar near the stairwell and didn't even flinch. He was too busy shouting at a nurse who had misplaced a file. "You people can't do the simplest tasks," he barked. "Why don't you leave if you can't handle pressure?" The nurse blinked back tears but said nothing. That night, Sundar sat by the hospital garden. It was a small, overgrown space between two wings of the building. Not many came here. Too busy, too tired. But he sat there under the old neem tree, watching a crow pick at a biscuit someone had dropped earlier. In his lap was the same folder, now with extra pages. He had been writing every evening, thoughts, observations, notes. Not for punishment, for transformation. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, may I sit here?" It was Arav, the young doctor who had noticed Sundar on the first day. "Of course," Sundar said, moving slightly to make space on the bench. Arav sat down, stretching his tired legs. He looked at Sundar with curiosity. "You've been around a lot lately, always helping, always watching. And you've been noticing," Sundar replied with a smile. Arav chuckled. "I have. You're not just a volunteer, are you?" Sundar didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "What do you love most about being a doctor?" Arav hesitated. "I think the idea that you can be the turning point in someone's worst day, that maybe your words or your hands could pull someone back from the edge. And what do you hate most?" This time the answer came quicker. "The silence. The times you want to speak up but don't. Because the system is too rigid. Because someone like Dr. Nambiar will humiliate you. Or because you think maybe you're too junior to matter." Sundar nodded slowly. "What if someone told you your voice did matter? What if you could help change this place?" Arav looked at him seriously now. "I'd say I want that more than anything. But change here feels impossible." Sundar didn't say more. He just patted the folder on his lap. "Maybe not." The next morning began like any other. Sundar arrived before sunrise. He helped move supplies from the storage room. He walked an old woman to her appointment and stayed with her when her son didn't show up. People had started smiling at him more. Not because they knew who he was, but because they could feel something rare in him. Presence. True presence. The kind that doesn't just pass through a room but notices everything. Around noon, he heard shouting again. This time from the pediatric ward. He followed the sound and found Dr. Nambiar once more, standing over a nurse who looked barely 20. Why wasn't this report filed last night? This is basic responsibility. Are you here to do a job or just take up space? The nurse stammered. Sir, I tried. But the printer was... Don't give me excuses, Nambiar barked. People like you slow down the entire system. Sundar stepped forward. Excuse me. Dr. Nambiar turned sharply. You again? Didn't I tell you to stay out of the way? I'm not in the way, Sundar said softly. But I do have a question. Nambiar folded his arms, already annoyed. What? Do you believe shouting at someone helps them grow? What is this? A therapy session? Nambiar snapped. This is a hospital. We don't have time for fragile feelings. We have lives to save. And what about the lives of the people who work here? Sundar asked, his voice still calm. Are their lives not worth protecting too? A silence fell around them. A few nurses had stopped what they were doing. Even Arav passing by stood still. Nambiar scoffed. You think you know how to run this place better than me? You think kindness fixes broken bones? I think kindness prevents broken people, Sundar said. Nambiar took a step forward, ready to explode. Who do you think you are? Sundar opened the folder and pulled out a sheet. This is the letter I gave you 3 days ago. You stepped on it. Nambiar blinked. This is the same hospital where my mother was once treated like a forgotten name on a file. I came back here not to accuse but to heal what I once felt. But you didn't give me that chance. I don't have time for this nonsense, Nambiar said, turning. But this time, Sundar raised his voice, just a little. You should make time, because the man you dismissed owns this hospital. The words hit like thunder. Nambiar stopped. What? I am Sundar Pichai, not just a name in a letter. I'm the man who kept this hospital from shutting down 6 years ago, the man who paid for the surgical wing, the man whose foundation funds half the beds in this ward. The hallway went still. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. And yet, Sundar continued, I came here quietly, not to be recognized, but to see the truth. And the truth is that the culture here needs healing as much as the patients do. Nambiar's mouth opened, but no words came. Sundar looked around at the staff, the tired nurse, the watching doctors, the worried intern. I'm not here to punish, but I will not ignore what I've seen. Things must change. And those who don't value respect, compassion, and humility will not have a place here anymore. The silence that followed was not just shock. It was hope, buried hope, now rising. A stillness fell over the pediatric ward that no machine could measure. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed a tragedy, but something subtler, heavier. The moment when everyone in a room suddenly sees someone differently. Sundar stood calmly, his expression unchanged, as if revealing his identity had not lifted a mask, but rather placed a mirror in front of everyone else. Dr. Vijay Nambiar stood frozen, like a man who had just been told he'd misread the map while driving at full speed. 1,000 thoughts seemed to collide behind his eyes. His voice, usually sharp and confident, struggled to find its footing. You own this hospital? He asked, not with curiosity, but with disbelief. Sundar didn't reply with grandeur. He simply nodded. Yes, through a foundation, quietly, because I wanted this place to be about people, not about power. And you were just sitting here like a volunteer? I wasn't just anything, Sundar said gently. I was listening, watching, understanding. Nambiar glanced around and saw nurses, interns, and a few junior doctors all staring, not at Sundar anymore, but at him. And for the first time, he felt small. Why wouldn't you tell us who you were from the beginning, he said, trying to regain control. Because I didn't want your best version, Sundar said. I wanted your real one. The words landed hard. Not like a slap, but like cold water on a face that had grown too comfortable in heat. Sundar turned to the young nurse who had just been scolded. What's your name? She swallowed. Mira. You did your best, Mira, he said. I saw it. And when someone tries their best, they deserve support, not shame. Mira's eyes welled up, not from sadness, but from the feeling of being seen, maybe for the first time in this building. Without saying more, Sundar walked past Nambiar and continued down the corridor. The silence didn't follow him. It stayed wrapped around Nambiar, like a truth too large to step around. Upstairs in the boardroom, the news traveled fast. Within hours, Mr. Singh, the hospital CEO, had gathered the department heads. There was tension in the room, not fear, but uncertainty. None of them had seen Sundar in person in years. Most had never met him at all. They had only heard of the man behind the foundation, the name at the bottom of funding memos. To them, he had always been a symbol, not a man. Until now. Sundar entered the room with no ceremony. No assistant, no security, just the same folder in his hand and the same calm in his voice. "Thank you for coming," he said, taking a seat at the long table. The department heads remained quiet. Their eyes were cautious, measuring his tone, looking for signs of what would come next. "Some of you may be wondering why I came the way I did," he began. "No announcement, no meetings, no title on a name tag. But that's the only way I could truly understand this hospital. Not from the top floor, but from the hallway floor." He opened the folder and placed several pages on the table. "These are my observations, not just about processes or equipment, but about people, about culture, about how we treat those who serve and those who are served." A woman from the cardiology wing cleared her throat. "Sir, is this about Dr. Nambiar?" Sundar nodded. "He is part of it, but not all of it. This isn't about one man's failure. It's about the environment that allowed that failure to become normal." He looked around the room. "I don't want resignations. I want responsibility. I want the people in this hospital, every nurse, every cleaner, every junior doctor, to feel like their work matters, like their voice matters. And that starts with you." Someone else asked, "What kind of changes are you proposing?" "First," Sundar said, "we're going to establish a staff well-being committee. Every department must have a representative. Not just senior staff. Everyone. They'll report directly to my office." A few people scribbled notes. "Second, we're launching an anonymous feedback channel for patients and employees, not filtered through administration. Real voices, real stories." He leaned forward slightly. "And third, we're introducing humility training for department heads. We can't ask others to lead with compassion if we don't practice it ourselves." Mr. Singh nodded slowly. "This will change a lot of things." "Yes," Sundar said. "It will." Meanwhile, back in the general ward, the shift in energy had already begun to spread. News travels differently in a hospital, not through memos or bulletins, but through whispers in the pharmacy, quiet conversations by the vending machine, glances exchanged between two nurses as they passed charts between them. Word had gotten out. The soft-spoken volunteer was the owner. Some were shocked, others were not. "I told you," Arav whispered to Ananya. He had that calm power, the kind you don't fake. "He sat with my patient for an hour yesterday," Ananya said. "No rush, no phone, just listened." "Who does that anymore?" Arav asked. But not everyone responded with admiration. In the doctor's lounge, Dr. Nambiar stood alone, holding a cup of tea he hadn't sipped. His colleagues gave him space, unsure of how to approach him. His authority had cracked, and it wasn't clear yet whether it would heal or crumble completely. Later that evening, Sundar returned to the same garden bench under the neem tree. It had become his quiet place, his thinking space. Arav joined him again, this time without asking. "Do you ever regret it?" Arav asked. "Regret what?" "Being quiet, staying invisible, letting people underestimate you." Sundar thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but most of the time, no. People show their truest selves when they think no one's watching. And it's important to know who people really are, not who they pretend to be when power enters the room." Arav nodded slowly. "What will happen to Dr. Nambiar?" That depends on him, Sundar said. I'm not here to destroy, I'm here to rebuild. But rebuilding begins with admitting something is broken. Arav looked at him, then smiled. You know, you could have stayed at the top, signed a few checks, sent a few emails, but you chose to walk through the fire. I had to, Sundar said, because this fire burns people quietly, slowly, and no one notices until it's too late. At that moment, the sun dipped below the hospital rooftop, casting a soft orange glow over the garden. Inside the building, changes had already begun. The cleaner who used to be ignored was now being greeted. The cafeteria staff received thanks instead of orders, and in the main lobby, a nurse put up a new bulletin board with a single quote at the top. True leadership is not about being the loudest in the room, but the one who listens the most. It had been 1 week since the hallway confrontation, but the echoes of Sundar's quiet words still lingered in the air like a scent no one could place. The hospital hadn't changed on the surface. The lights still flickered in the same hallway corners. The old vending machine still stole 5 rupee coins from hopeful fingers, and the patients still cried in the night. But underneath all, that something deeper was beginning to shift. Invisible threads were moving through the hospital. Smiles lingered a little longer. People asked questions they used to keep to themselves. The cleaner named Jamil was now greeted by name instead of just a wave of the hand. The cafeteria line had seen senior doctors actually waiting instead of cutting ahead. Junior staff were noticing something strange and new, respect. But every transformation, no matter how well intended, disturbs what's comfortable. And in the private corners of the hospital, in glass rooms with blinds half shut, resistance was forming. Not loud, not obvious, but real. Inside one of these rooms, Dr. Vijay Nambiar sat across from 2 senior administrators, men he had worked with. For years, men who had risen through the system with him. He wasn't shouting now. He wasn't pacing. His anger had cooled into something sharper. Strategy. He wants to tear down everything we built, Dr. Nambiar said quietly. He's trying to improve things, one of the administrators replied cautiously. The staff actually seem happier. Happier doesn't mean efficient, Nambiar snapped, but kept his voice low. He doesn't understand what it takes to keep a place like this running. Systems, discipline, not tea breaks and speeches about humility. He's the owner, Vijay, the other man said. He can do what he wants. No, Nambiar said, leaning forward. He's the face. But this place doesn't run because of money. It runs because of habits, because of people like us, who know how to keep things moving. There was a silence. So what are you suggesting? One of the administrators asked. Nambiar smiled faintly. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying, people can be made to doubt. And when people doubt, they hesitate, and when they hesitate, change stops. Outside the room, down in the general ward, Sundar sat beside a young boy named Dev. The boy had broken both his legs in an accident and hadn't spoken much since arriving. The staff said he had withdrawn completely, refusing to smile or talk. But Sundar wasn't trying to fix him. He was simply being there. He brought storybooks. He drew silly stick figures. He told the boy stories from his own childhood, about growing up in a 2-room home in Chennai, about playing cricket with a stick and rubber ball, about the smell of his mother's rasam filling their house in the evenings. On the 3rd day, Dev finally looked up and asked, "Did your mom ever get mad when you broke something?" Sundar smiled. "Once I dropped her favorite glass bowl. She didn't shout, but she made me eat rice without curry for 2 days. Said I had to learn how it felt to miss something." Dev laughed softly, the first time anyone had seen him do that since he arrived. Across the hallway, Arav watched the moment from behind a clipboard. He had been keeping track of Sundar's visits, writing his own quiet notes. Not because anyone had asked him to, but because something inside him had begun to shift too. He had always wanted to be a doctor, but now for the first time he was beginning to understand what kind of doctor he truly wanted to be. That evening, a problem arose. A nurse from the IQ approached Sundar quietly as he stood near the elevator. "Sir, there's something you should see." He followed her through the back corridor to the ICU, where a patient's family sat in silence. The woman on the bed was in her early 60s, breathing through a ventilator. Her husband stood by the window, staring out. The nurse leaned toward Sundar and whispered, "They're refusing treatment. Said they can't afford the bills." Sundar nodded and walked over to the man. "Namaste," he said gently. The man turned, startled. Are you one of the doctors?" "No," Sundar replied. "Just someone who understands what it's like to feel helpless in a hospital." The man's eyes filled. "We've already sold my wife's jewelry, the medicines, the machines. It's too much. They said without the full payment, they can't continue." "Who said that?" Sundar asked. "The billing officer. He said no payment, no care." Sundar's expression tightened slightly. He turned to the nurse. "Get me the case file, and ask Mr. Singh to meet me in the finance office, now." Within 30 minutes, Sundar stood in the finance office with Mr. Singh and the head of billing. The patient's file was on the table. "This woman qualifies for our compassion fund," Sundar said firmly. The head of billing hesitated. "Sir, the paperwork wasn't complete, and we've been told to clear approvals only through the admin route. It's a process." Sundar placed both hands on the desk. "That process almost let a woman die. We were just following protocol," the man said defensively. "Then the protocol is broken," Sundar replied. "And we're fixing it immediately." He turned to Mr. Singh. "I want all compassion fund approvals routed through a new system. Fast track, real time, with doctor validation. And no family should ever hear the words no payment, no care in this building again. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Mr. Singh said. But somewhere behind that agreement, doubt had begun to form. Not about Sundar's intentions, but about how deep the resistance would go. Later that night, Sundar sat again under the neem tree. It was raining lightly and the smell of wet earth rose into the air like memory. Arav approached, holding a large umbrella. "You're going to fall sick sitting out here," he said. "Maybe," Sundar replied. "But sometimes rain helps. You think clearer." Arav sat beside him, holding the umbrella over both of them. "People are talking," he said. "Some love what you're doing. Some are scared. And a few are angry. I expected that. Are you worried?" Sundar looked out at the dark clouds. "Not for myself, but for the people who will suffer if this place doesn't change." Arav nodded. "There's something else. I heard a rumor." "What kind?" "That someone's been spreading false complaints. Anonymous ones. Claiming you've been interfering with treatments, that you're overstepping." Sundar stayed quiet for a moment. "And who do you think is behind it?" "I don't know. But if I had to guess?" "Dr. Nambiar," Sundar finished. Arav looked down. "I didn't say that. You didn't need to." The next morning, an internal audit was launched. Sundar had ordered a full review of patient complaints, billing records, staff feedback, and treatment delays. He asked for nothing to be filtered. Everything had to come through, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But as the files began pouring in, something unexpected happened. Among the reports was one anonymous document, typed in simple font, with no signature. But what it said stopped. Sundar called. "This hospital is not just broken by habit, it's being poisoned by hidden deals. Illegal equipment contracts, ghost patients, fake tests billed to the charity fund. Ask Dr. Nambiar about Project Mirage. He'll understand." Sundar stared at the paper, his fingers tightening around its edges. The truth he had been looking for wasn't just cultural, it was criminal. And suddenly the mission to heal the hospital had become something much bigger and far more dangerous. The morning began like all others. The usual buzz filled the hospital. Wheels of stretchers squeaking against the floor, nurses exchanging clipped instructions at the shift handover, tired eyes behind surgical masks, the constant beeping of machines reminding everyone that time in this place was measured not in hours but in heartbeats. But somewhere behind the rhythm of routine, a storm was quietly rising. And this time Sundar wasn't just watching. He was ready to bring the entire storm with him. He stood by the window of his temporary office, a plain space with a desk, a chair, and the folder that had followed him since day one. Outside, the city moved on without knowing what was about to happen inside this building. The anonymous letter from the previous day sat open on the desk, its words echoing louder than, "Any alarm? Ask Dr. Nambiar about Project Mirage, he'll understand." Sundar hadn't slept. Instead, he'd spent the night poring over digital records, calling trusted auditors, and tracing every thread the letter hinted at. By sunrise, the pieces had begun to fit, and they painted a picture darker than he had feared. There were 3 key red flags. First, medical equipment invoices showing purchases double the market price. Second, fake patient files used to bill the Compassion Fund, money meant for the poor. Third, a silent partnership signed 2 years ago with a shady supplier under a shell company named Mirage Medical Solutions. The contracts were signed by the admin office. The approvals were processed by middle management, but the initiator of it all, the one who first pushed Project Mirage, was Dr. Vijay Nambiar. Now, Sundar held the truth in his hands, but exposing it wouldn't be as simple as walking into a room and pointing fingers. This wasn't just about fraud. It was about betrayal, about a man trusted with lives who had chosen greed over ethics. And worse, others had stayed silent. They had allowed it, protected it, benefited from it. Sundar knew if he exposed this without care, the entire hospital might collapse under the weight of scandal. But if he stayed silent, the rot would spread even deeper. He made a decision, not to destroy, but to reveal. The truth would not come like fire. It would come like light, silent, steady, impossible to escape. By noon, he had summoned a full, emergency board meeting. The top administrators, department heads, legal advisors, and financial controllers gathered in the executive conference room, the same one that had once dismissed his silent presence. As they settled into their seats, the room buzzed with uncertainty. Whispers of, "What's this about?" passed from one person to another. Sundar entered last. Not with drama, just with quiet certainty. He placed a thick folder on the table. No one spoke. He looked at Mr. Singh first. "You've been with this hospital for 8 years, Sundar said. "Do you remember why I asked you to take over as CEO?" Mr. Singh cleared his throat. "Because you believed in systems that put people first." "That's right," Sundar replied. "But somewhere along the way we lost sight of that. And today we're going to confront the truth." He turned to the room. "I've received evidence of corruption tied to medical equipment contracts and fraudulent billing of the Compassion Fund." The room went still. "There's a fake vendor being used to siphon funds, a project called Mirage." He paused, then looked straight at Dr. Nambiar. "Does that sound familiar to you?" Nambiar's eyes widened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. "You pushed for the vendor," Sundar continued. "You vouched for the equipment. You silenced staff who questioned the billing irregularities. And you made sure the trail led nowhere. But now, it leads here." Nambiar finally spoke. "You think this is me? You think I'm the only one? I didn't sign every document. I didn't approve every payment. Don't act like this is all on me." "No," Sundar said quietly. "You're right. This wasn't one man's doing. But you were the first hand that pushed the domino. And you wore the coat of responsibility while hiding the hands of profit." He turned to the rest of the room. "I'm placing Dr. Nambiar on immediate administrative suspension, pending a full investigation. The vendor contracts are frozen. An external audit team will review every department, every expense, and every report. And anyone who knew about this and said nothing, you have one chance to come forward. If you don't, you'll leave with more than your pride damaged." A long silence followed, heavy, sharp. Then, something unexpected happened.